dia a todos, novamente. Temos também aí a tradição de colocar no chat de que organização somos, ou, enfim, expectativas, e, evidentemente, depois também a gente, no momento do debate, a gente abre microfone, chat, levanta a mãozinha, enfim, aquelas coisas que a gente aprendeu a fazer na pandemia. E também no decorrer das apresentações, fiquem à vontade de já ir colocando perguntas, porque daí a gente, para quem não se anima a abrir o microfone e fazer pessoalmente, a gente também tem esse papel de trazer, especialmente hoje que temos essa circunstância de que a palestra principal vai ser em inglês. Então, se quiserem trazer uma pergunta em português no chat, que a gente depois traduz e vice-versa, fiquem à vontade. Então, na Rede, para quem não conhece, somos aí associados mantenedores e institucionais. Temos aqui muitos hoje, mas em razão da Agenda 2030 ser uma agenda da humanidade, né, ou do mundo e da Terra também, nós decidimos fazer essa reunião do GT-ODS hoje excepcionalmente aberta e super felizes aí por termos tantos parceiros e conhecidos aí que recebem aí os nossos comunicados e acompanham a rede de alguma maneira também no LinkedIn, porque a gente acredita que, e isso a Karina vai explicar daqui a pouco, a principal contribuição da rede, justamente por ser tão diversa, é a gente permitir, né, ou promover essas pontes, como a gente acredita que esteja facilitando nessa discussão de hoje. E assim, temos reuniões bimestrais, onde debatemos temas estratégicos, e também, em paralelo, reuniões de grupos de trabalho. Depois eu posso compartilhar esse slide com quem tiver interesse, também está no nosso site. Mas hoje, especialmente, a gente quer agradecer aí a Karina, que é coordenadora do GT de ODS, e ela vai compartilhar conosco agora, brevemente, o que motivou a criação desse GT e o que a gente fez com ele até agora e pretende fazer com vocês a partir de hoje. Obrigada. Karina, é você.
Legal, pessoal. Bom dia a todos. Good morning, Shanique. Nice to meet you. Bom, vou falar aqui rapidinho em português para abrir o espaço, então, para a apresentação da Shanique, mas o que a gente queria trazer hoje, até, né, não sei se... acredito que tenham pessoas aqui que não são associadas da rede, então eu acho que faz parte a gente comentar um pouquinho o que é esse trabalho dentro do GT-ODS. Ele surgiu com essa necessidade, né, primeiro de entender, né, todo o papel que a rede tem de impactar tanto as organizações quanto a própria atuação dela, e como fazer essa conexão entre ODS e a avaliação do ciclo de vida. Então, desde ali de 2019, que foi a fundação do GT, a gente vem, então, trazendo organizações para compartilhar suas experiências, ou workshops para entender quais são os ODS, e como a CV pode apoiar o cumprimento e o atingimento desses objetivos. Então, a gente vem fazendo isso ao longo dos anos, e o ano passado, no final do ano passado, então, a gente fez um trabalho de entender o que a rede CV, quanto organização, consegue contribuir de forma mais efetiva. E a gente fez isso conversando com outros grupos de trabalho, como uma forma de entender quem são os principais stakeholders hoje da rede CV, quem são aqueles setores mais impactados e que, de alguma forma, estão representados dentro da rede CV, e também quais são temas que são estratégicos e relevantes. E a gente chegou num resultado, né, que foi interessante, né, porque o que a gente seguiu como metodologia foi o SDG Compass, para conseguir entender, né, e priorizar alguns ODS. E a gente chegou em 2 deles que a gente entende que a rede ACV consegue contribuir. Então, a forma que a gente estruturou isso, e como resultado, né, entrega desse grupo, foi justamente entender quais eram aqueles ODS que a gente iria entender como prioritário, porque são aqueles que a gente consegue contribuir quanto rede de forma mais efetiva, e também aqueles ODS que são transversais. Então, como de alguma maneira a avaliação do ciclo de vida, o pensamento de ciclo de vida, consegue contribuir com o atingimento. Então, a gente chegou no ODS 12, de consumo e produção responsáveis e o ODS 17, como parcerias e meios de implementação como prioritários, ou seja, objeto, né, de comprometimento da Rede ECV, e a gente mapeou aqui outros 9 ODS que são transversais, indo aí desde o Fome Zero e Agricultura Sustentável até vida terrestre de biodiversidade. Então, essa foi a entrega que a gente está, e a gente está num momento agora... Deu uma falha aqui. A gente está no momento de entender qual é essa conexão, e eu acho que a palestra e o que a Shanique vai trazer para a gente vai contribuir de forma bastante significativa. Pode passar, Sol. Legal. Eu acho que a gente pode já pular, só para dizer que a gente pegou ali um recorte, né, desses ODS, existem quase 169 outras metas. Então, só para dizer, né, que por que a gente entende o ODS 12, especialmente porque ele está muito atrelado essa questão da disseminação da CV como ferramenta para, então, comunicar e divulgar a CV e, de alguma forma, capacitar também os profissionais e promover, né, os benefícios da CV. Então, esse foi o objetivo. E como pilares, a gente entende, a gente dividiu, né, com esse olhar para grupos de trabalho, com eventos e cursos como esse que a gente está aqui agora, pela publicação e comunicação. E aí, como objetivo, já no ODS 17, o olhar é mais a criação desse ambiente de cooperação entre as empresas, e aí a gente dividiu isso em outros 3 pilares, que é o de atração, retenção e resgate de associados, assim como as parcerias estratégicas, e uma grande entrega desse GT é o assessment de maturidade dos associados, para acompanhar, então, quantos associados estão maduros com relação à aplicação da ACV nas suas organizações. Então, em resumo, é nesse momento que a gente está, com esses ODS já estabelecidos, e a atuação é muito voltada para isso, e eu acho que hoje a palestra da Shanique vai contribuir muito para a gente entender como fazer essas conexões com os outros ODS, para os grupos de trabalho que a Rede ACV tem, mas também para as próprias organizações, né, dos associados da Rede. Termino minha fala aqui, só.
Não, e também compreender criticamente, que eu acho que é o que a Shanique mais vai explorar, se tem realmente tanta aderência e aonde que os ODS talvez necessitem algum trabalho maior para justamente conectar com coisas que talvez ainda não estejam previstas o suficiente. Mas a gente deixa a Shanique para dizer isso para a gente. Obrigada, Ká, assim, por tudo que você faz nesse GT e vai fazer ainda muito mais.
Prazer é todo meu, você sabe disso.
Ai, legal. Assim, bom dia aqui eu tô vendo aqui que a gente já tem mais de 40 participantes, muito felizes com isso. Para quem não pegou o início, a gente sempre coloca no chat, para quem quiser, né? Enfim, qual organização representa, um pouco das expectativas, para promover essa conexão entre vocês. A gente na rede quer muito que vocês estejam depois em contato diretamente, e como é transparente aqui quem está participando, vocês depois podem se encontrar via LinkedIn, enfim, então explorem bastante essa oportunidade de saber quem mais está interessado nessa conexão aí dos ODS com as categorias de impacto, com o pensar ciclo de vida. Então, agora eu vou mudar para inglês, até para a Shanique entender que é a vez dela agora começar a falar. Como eu disse no início, fiquem à vontade para fazer perguntas no chat, que pode ser em português e a gente traduz para ela. Na sequência, a palestra dela deve se estender por 50 minutos, mais ou menos, então, mais tardar às 11, a gente abre aí meia hora para um debate com todos. Quem não puder ficar mais meia hora, que a gente sabe que a agenda está bastante concorrida de todos os colegas, a gente também comentar, né, que a gente está gravando justamente para poder depois mandar a gravação. Quando não é associado, a gente manda por WeTransfer, porque é bastante pesado. Para quem é associado, a gente simplesmente sobe no Teams do GT ODS, nesse caso hoje. Certinho? Então, eu vou parar de compartilhar. Shanique, dear, now we did the introduction around 10 minutes like we promised. So now the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. And really lovely to meet you both and everyone as well. I know I can't see everyone's faces, but lovely to meet you. And sorry that this presentation has to be in English. I missed a little bit of what was going on in the beginnings, and maybe it's about prioritizing SDGs and so on, but maybe I'll have some questions for you actually at the end. So I'll save them for then. And I will share my screen.
While you do that, I was just telling everybody that they can feel free to ask questions in Portuguese in the chat, and we translate them for you. And if you have questions for us, that'd be great too.
Okay, great. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Sonia, will you just interrupt me then with questions, because I can't see all of your faces if any questions come in the chat.
Okay.
Great. Great. Well, lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Shanique Pillay. I am an analyst at PRé Sustainability, and I work mostly in the fields of social value assessment and biodiversity assessment. Those two subjects are very close to my heart, so it's been really great to get to apply myself and develop the methodologies behind them. And then recently we have completed this project that I will be presenting today. But I thought I would first start with a short introduction of the company that I come from. So I work for PRé Sustainability, and we are the developers of CIMA Pro, with the goal of making sustainability more fact-based. So we started this journey in 1990 with a quantitative approach to life cycle assessment. And that's still our driving value. So we're not as small as we used to be. I think we started actually with 7 people, but we're all the way up to, I think, 80 at this point. And we're still a small company, but I think we're having a large impact in software and lifecycle assessment and in consultancy. So I'm in that consultancy team. And we also have quite a global coverage. So we also have partners all over the world that help us to distribute our software, but also define better quality databases in all of these places. So we have about 25 partners around the world and quite an active community, as well as many users of our LCA software. Yes. So today what I will present and what Sonia has asked me to talk a bit more about is a 3-year-long project which was captioned linking the life cycle information to the SDGs. And this was a UN Environment Program where it was kind of a collaboration between 2 consultancies. We are one of them, and then our partners at the Danish consultancy 2.0 LCA consultants. And then we had 3 industry partners who tested the methodology that we created. So it was a 3-year-long project, and it just ended at the end of last year. And I'll go through kind of the methodology and the process that was developed, but mostly focused on how it works and how it could be applied and how it could be useful for an organization like Rede ACV, where there are a lot of companies already with life cycle impact information, and they're looking to say something a bit more about how these relate to the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a very familiar picture, of course, to all of us, the 17 goals. And they were developed in 2015. They followed on from the Millennial Development Goals, and they were really centered towards governing bodies or policy focused. So they were trying to look at a blueprint for peace and prosperity for our planet and for people. And they were really focused with this top-down view of how can we do this while looking at governing systems. But this, of course, presents a huge problem for companies because how do companies interpret this? How do companies relate to these goals, and at what level should they report on them, and what business impacts are actually important to report on? This was still a huge gap. And then the credibility with which a business reports on their contribution to the SDGs is also in question. So how could these links be made more credible, and how could they reduce SDG washing? I probably don't have to explain what SDG washing is, but it's a coined term that follows on from greenwashing, where, companies don't validify their results and just make claims based on no evidence. So this was a kind of a background and starting point of the project. And of course, we have this amazing tool that companies already use to assess their environmental and social impact, and that's life cycle assessment. So the challenge of the project was then to link these two. So how could these results be linked to the SDGs? And luckily, we had a whole 3-year period to try and figure that out. So we started first with a kind of stepwise approach, and we followed the traditional LCA process, which has these 4 very defined steps, starting with the goal and scope, then the inventory analysis, the impact assessment, and then interpretation or direct application. So we really used that framework to shape how we wanted to develop the method. And we developed it with the same kind of ideas. So firstly, having a goal and scope, and then collecting LCA results and determining SDG contribution. And they can have roughly the same applications. So knowing your SDG contribution can identify hotspots in the SDGs. It can show which of your products are contributing to which SDGs. It can be used for strategic decision making, and can even be used for capacity building internally in a company. And of course, the most important demand from companies was really to try to help this reporting demand. So how to make SDG reporting more robust. So we started with the screening approach, firstly with the question of at which level can we actually say something about the SDGs. So we can either say something about the SDGs on a goal level. So for example, the SDG 0 hunger can be reported on, but you could also report something on a target level. So each of the SDGs have a number of different targets that sit under them. And we could say something about each of those as they contribute to the full goal. So there's it's also important to know that there are 2 levels to SDGs as well. So we firstly started with the goal and scope. And the goal and scope for this SDG study is very similar to regular LCA, but of course there are a few additions. So compared to performing a regular life cycle assessment, for this step, we would need to have the definition of an environmental benchmark. So an environmental benchmark is a benchmark that your product can be compared to. So it could be an average t-shirt if you're looking to study a t-shirt and that's what your company makes. And you want to really compare your performance with reference to this average in the sector. Then additionally, you'd have to determine the scope of the SDGs. So I know in the first 10 minutes, we pulled up a few SDGs in the bottom that related to a few others. So the company would have to decide which SDGs are a priority, either to them as a sector. So it could be important SDGs for the textile sector, for example, or you could assess all of the SDGs, and the question could be whether you contribute to any and which ones. And then you'd also have to make a decision about whether to report on this goal or target level. So we kind of help the case study companies go through this through a template and talk through what the intention is for the study. And this is kind of the goal and scope definition step. So the goal definition, as I said, is the first step. And a few examples of what a goal could be. So a goal could be to understand which SDGs or what number of SDGs your product is currently contributing to. It could also be to determine if and how the contribution of the product to the SDG happens, so to which SDGs over a certain amount of time. And this is more of a monitoring perspective. So perhaps you want to improve your contribution to a certain SDG, and then year by year you can do this assessment using annual LCA results, for example. Then another goal could be to support working towards a positive contribution to the SDGs. So really improving those hotspots that you see or that have been located through the assessment. And then another goal could be to support communication. So really to be able to claim that you actually do contribute positively to certain SDGs. Then the scope definition. So the influence of the goal also influences the scope of the SDGs in which you do the assessment. So if your goal is really to get a general idea of which SDGs your product is contributing to, then you should include all of them. But if you have already a specific set of SDGs that you want to analyze, that you've chosen as a company or that you see are important to your sector, then only those that are relevant should be included in the scope. Then similar to a normal LCA, it's always good to draw a system boundary diagram. And this just helps to understand each of the life cycle stages, but also the stakeholders that are important in each of those stages. And it can just be a good idea to draw those system boundaries beforehand and to understand where you have data, both environmental and social, for each of those stages and for each of those stakeholders that are involved. So this is just an example of that. So then we move to the data collection stage, and that's the next stage, which corresponds to an inventory analysis. And we have used as a starting point environmental impact categories and social impact categories. So those are the only two sustainability topics that are included in the methodology as yet. And those are the kind of LCA results that we had available within our industry partners as well. So we used environmental impact categories from Environmental Footprint 3.0. And then we used the Product Social Metrics Handbook and the social impact categories that come from there. So these impact categories all, as you can see here, have their own corresponding stakeholder groups. So here you have the environment, workers, users, small-scale entrepreneurs, and local communities. And this is kind of the information that is needed as an input into the methodology. So another important concept to cover is the idea of a reference scale. So to determine whether a product is really contributing to an SDG, we need to measure it against something else. So a reference point is kind of needed in order to measure the performance of your own product. And we call this a benchmark. And it's used, therefore, to determine that relative performance. So as I mentioned before, it could be a benchmark could be chosen from a PEFCR, for example. So if you had a PEFCR for a t-shirt, that could be a widely available benchmark to measure your own performance of your own t-shirt buy. And then another important concept was the idea of the reference scale approach. And those who are maybe familiar with social impact are familiar with this in a qualitative way. So the 5-scale approach is used in the product social metrics handbook. And this is for social, basically describes that a product performs well if it goes beyond the compliance measure. So the 0 level is really that you comply with local laws or international standards. And if your product is performing really above this, it gets a positive score. And if it performs below, then it gets a negative score. So we try to also then apply this to environmental impact, where we say, if we have this quantitative environmental data, if your product performs better relative to your benchmark, then you get a positive score, and if not, a negative score. So these are just some concepts that we came up with and introduced during the course of the project. And then we have developed a data collection guideline, and this takes all of the companies through every step of the process and exactly what is required. Then we move on to the impact assessment and interpretation stage. And this is where things get very interesting. So this is where we actually determine the SDG contribution. And for us as method developers, this was where most of the research went into. And the way that we went about this is in a similar way to how a normal impact assessment would be. So maybe some of you are familiar with some very common impact assessment methods like recipe. We tried to use that approach and that thinking to try and understand where the links are actually between the cause-effect chain rather. So firstly, we tried to classify if there is a link. So we asked the question, is there a relation between the impact categories that we have used as input data and the SDG? And then we used direct links that are included and indirect links that are made under certain conditions. Then we try to characterize these links. So we say, what is the nature of the relationship? How much is the impact category actually associated with the outcome of the target? And this step determines really the score that is needed to qualify as a contribution. And lastly, we do a relative importance step. So we say, how important actually are these LCA impact categories with relation to each other? And this uses a few insights from the parallel method that was being developed by our partners, our Danish partners at 2.0 LCA Consultants. So this is a similar kind of thinking to how characterization factors are made in an impact assessment method, but we kind of adapted here for the way that impact categories are linked to the SDG targets. So firstly, we determine the score on this 5-point scale for each of the impact categories. And then this information is used in the next step, which is to give each of them this score and to ensure that the link is there. So for example, an impact category can be scored +1 for climate change, where the product has outperformed the benchmark in this specific impact category. And I'll go over a little bit more about how the scoring actually works. So in normal LCA, we would aggregate these scores, and we would, because everything is quantitative, we can add all of the scores together. So if you look at a full carbon footprint of a product, it's all of the CO2 equivalent emissions from every life cycle over the whole product's life cycle, and that's an easy metric to add, and you get one full number at the end. but with incorporating both social and environmental impact categories, we had to think of something creative on how to actually communicate this result, or how to actually show a result that also includes the insights of how each impact category is scored. So we came up with a different system of scoring. And this is also quite technical, so don't worry about not understanding it, or not getting it on the first try. But I'll try to explain in as much simplicity as possible. So there are 5 options actually that exist in scoring your impact category. So the first option is that there's a blocking result, and this means that one of the impact categories under this SDG target has scored a -2, and this impact category is deemed to be a critical impact category to this target. So then it receives this blocking result, and it doesn't matter if all of the other impact categories score positively. This result precedes all of the others. Then we have the result of a red flag, and this is when one of the impact categories under the score also scores a -2. The only exception here is now the impact category is not deemed critical to the target, so we just say that it's a red flag. So it's a hotspot, or an SDG hotspot. So here it's a red flag for the company that they contribute negatively for this impact category. Then we have a potentially positive contribution. So it can be difficult to try and explain under a target. There are many impact categories, and they could be a variety of different results. And sometimes they could be very positive, and they could be also very negative. But how to reflect this as a final result? So here we came up with the idea of this weakest link approach. So you should always reflect the most negative hotspots in your result, but also be able to qualitatively explain that there are some potentially positive results that are included. So this is an example of that the contribution is potentially beneficial, but there are some red flags that shouldn't be overseen. Then a potentially positive contribution. This really means that there's been no negative scores under that target, and that actually there's only a potential positive claim that can be made for your contribution here. And then lastly, a neutral contribution really means there was none of the impact categories actually score positively or negatively, and perhaps they haven't been included in the characterization step. So here it's none of the data actually helps to score the impact category itself. So the steps of this impact assessment stage is really to determine the score on this 5-point scale, to check if the impact category scores apply to the SDG target that you are assessing, and then to assign this score. And then the 3rd and 4th step here are to combine these impact category scores into a score per target. So this can be done in the scoring way, so in one of these 5 ways. And then that qualitative score can also be combined into an overall target score, so into an SDG score. So this was a very complicated look and a little bit technical for someone who probably has very little experience. It's very theoretical and conceptual to understand. So I thought that I would try to use an example and perhaps walk you through a case, kind of a fake case that we thought would help in explaining. So the case that I chose, so I'm South African, And a large part of my continent actually experiences huge nutritional shortages. And I thought I'd come up with this example of a protein bar. So let's say that our product is a protein bar, and we want to supply our product to Western Africa because we think that we can really address the shortage of nutrition there, and we can really help with child development and health. So our company has a focus here on zero hunger and good health and well-being. So as we go through the steps now, I will show you how we can apply it. So the first step, as I explained before, is the classification step. And this shows actually which LCA impact categories are linked to the SDG. So if we focus on zero hunger, we can see that there are 5 different targets that the SDG has under it. And then we have created all of the links to various impact categories. So on the right of this diagram, you can see all of the impact categories that have links to each of the targets. So first, these links are classified, and then they are characterized. So then we have the step of explaining why the impact category actually contributes to this target, and what it would mean if you scored positively or negatively. So this was done for all of the SDGs. So in our example, let's say that we have a good and positive contribution to climate change compared to the other solutions that are in the market in that area. And let's say we also have a positive contribution to water deprivation. But for remuneration, we have found some incidents of workers being paid below minimum wage. And so we score negatively here for remuneration. But then for health, we of course are contributing positively to increasing the nutritional needs of that region. So we score a positive 2 there. So then we have some good and positive contributions, but we also have this red flag. So we also can see that there are these incidents of workers paid below minimum wage. So this is quite a contradictory outcome. How do we aggregate this? What can we say about this? And what we can say is that we can claim some positive contribution to target 2.1 because we have positive effects on climate change, water deprivation, and health. We also know that we cannot claim anything about discrimination or work-life balance because we don't have any data about it. But we should also be aware that there is this red flag that for remuneration. So the final qualitative result is really that yes, we're providing a good product and we're relieving a lot of the needs in the region. But if we don't pay our workers above living wage, then we cannot claim a full positive contribution here. So it's kind of this qualitative result where we can also include the nuances of different impact categories and how they relate to each other. So this was just a small example that I hope makes it a little bit clearer how the method could work and how a product could be assessed. And then based on the intended goals that I spoke a bit about in the beginning, so the goal and scope phase, we can also then communicate the study the way that the company would like. So there are many different ideas or options here, but we can identify positive contribution, we could identify risks, and we could communicate the results. So there's a lot of different applications that could be done by carrying through the assessment. So there are many associated documents at this stage. So we've done all of these linking reports for all 17 SDGs, and they've just been published also on the UNEP LCA site. So you can see some of them there if you want a bit more of information and examples about how it works. And then currently we're working on actually finalizing the methodology publication. So that will really be a showcasing of this is the method and this is how you can use it as a practitioner. And we went a little bit further actually, because we wanted to see how we had so many insights from the process, and especially from doing all of these linking documents, that we really wanted to see what other things that we could really say about LCA and the SDGs. So after this process, we created a heat map, and this might be very overwhelming to look at, but across the top, so the horizontal bar is looking at all the impact categories, and the vertical bar is all of the SDGs. And we thought it's really interesting actually to look at the number of links that the SDGs have to LCA information. And maybe we could say something about how well LCA actually covers the SDGs and how much they relate to each other at all. So we found some really interesting insights as a conclusion there. So firstly, we found that the SDGs are really well covered by LCA, that there are some that are in particular well covered. So these are life on land, zero hunger, health, water, and decent work. And these are repetitive, important subjects that the SDGs bring up. Then we see also that the SDGs that are less covered by LCA are also LCA sometimes cannot describe them. So this is gender equality, inequality, climate action, peace, justice, and partnerships. And that's also quite an interesting insight that actually the social LCA impact categories that we have don't fully cover these SDGs. And then the other way around, we saw LCA topics that are highly relevant for the SDGs. And this is where many SDGs are linked to one impact category. So by making small improvements to this one impact category, you could have large contributions across all SDGs. And for this, we found that climate change, water deprivation, remuneration, and meeting basic needs, as well as contribution to economic and skills development, these were all really vital topics in the impact categories, where if you make these smaller changes, they can really result in huge positive contributions across the SDGs. Then we also saw that there are some LCA topics that are a bit less relevant for SDGs, and that these are the topics of toxicity, ionizing radiation, resource use, privacy, which was actually found to be not linked at all, as well as health and safety. And these are those who had just less links across the board to all of the SDGs. Then we, of course, tested the methodology. So we did one round of iteration where we had these 3 case studies who implemented our method, and then we got to get their feedback and make the method a bit more robust. And in doing so, we had a lot of really rich experiences that the companies had. And some of these kind of high-level findings or insights were that the companies found it really easy to communicate their LCA results. So this is always a bit of a problem in LCA, that it's quite a technical field, and knowing the language and how an LCA works, or having the expertise is great. But for those who are not in the field, it's quite difficult to communicate what eutrophication is, for example, and why this is important. So the case study companies really found that it was very easy to communicate these results as soon as you say, okay, we contribute to this SDG because it's so relevant and everybody knows the SDGs, whereas LCA is a little bit more technical and a little bit less known. Then another finding was that the companies got to really focus on material SDGs. So which SDGs really mattered the most to their company. And many companies have these high-level sustainability strategies where they choose a number of SDGs that they think are important. And now they actually have this credible way to assess how their LCA results contribute directly to an SDG. Then another finding was that it was quite easy to apply. So if existing LCA results were already available, it's quite easy to apply the method because all of the method documents are there and it's just a matter of scoring. So that was a really good finding, that it can be an add-on to an LCA and can be done, quite easily through an automated process. Then another finding was also that it was really a standardized approach. So as I said in the beginning, the credibility of these links are always called into question, and companies are struggling to really prove that they contribute to an SDG. But this is really a standardized approach where any product manufacturing company is on the same level or is assessing their product on the same level. And they found this great because they could share results within the group of us, and we could compare and discuss, and they found this very valuable. And then they also, again, thought it was valuable for supporting their claims. So they didn't have to just claim that they contributed, but they could actually justify this now through the LCA results they already have. So, of course, in bringing any new methodology out, it requires a lot of building blocks. So that's kind of the idea behind this slide, is that every brick needs to be placed to build the wall eventually, and we still have a long way to go. So the question is how we continue to build, and it's not just the methodology, but it's how it can be used or potential toolings. So we're in thoughts now about many of these things. So firstly, we're going to publish and showcase the method as well as the case study results, and try to create more credible and evidence-based linking. So we really want to try and have it peer-reviewed as well. Then we are still testing the method currently with a case study company in the textile industry, and this is giving us a lot of valuable insights about how a method like this could be specified for a specific industry, as well as creating a premise for us to develop a data collection template, for example. And then we are also offering training. So because we've developed this method over quite a long time, it's also difficult to grasp. I mean, I only have 50 minutes here, and it was probably very intense and technical, but the training really goes through every step of the process and exactly what should be done. And then we're also thinking about a digitalized tooling situation in which results, for example, from the CIMA Pro platform could be linked directly to this SDG assessment, and it could be kind of additional analysis through some kind of API. So we're looking at that internally at PRé, how we could actually create a new tool from the method. So it's a very exciting time for this project, even though it's ended officially. I think a lot of the insights from it do continue. And I'm actually much less than 50 minutes, I think, but I've come to the end of my presentation. I hope that you're all able to follow, and I will gladly receive questions. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening.
Shanique, it was really great. Thank you so much. I hope you can share the slides with us afterwards so we can also send them over and have people reading it with more time. Maybe I can start with questions while the others show their interest and ask questions as well in the chat. I was wondering, I mean, it's a huge privilege to have you doing this presentation for us. Were you thinking when you accepted that maybe it would be nice to have a pilot something project with Brazil as well? I mean, we are aware that the SDGs were commitments signed by countries. So maybe how about applying everything you just developed to a country like Brazil?
Yeah, so this is exactly that. So as I just presented on my last slide, we really want the method not to just die out, but to be used. Actually, we created it for a pragmatic reason. We want companies to actually use it. And that's why I was very excited. Actually, it was initiated at the Lifecycle Innovation Conference that Beatrice came up to me and said, what an interesting method. And at Braskem, they're actually looking at saying something about the SDGs. And that's how this whole presentation was initiated. So yes, to answer your question, we are definitely looking at piloting this with different companies. We're looking at developing all of these capabilities, and hopefully we can get, I mean, ideally, we would like to have a bunch of different companies who are giving some time to apply the method. And what we've really found in the project is that when sitting in a group, so we had a group where some people, so one company was developing an ammonia method, another company was developing a meat preserving product, and they were from all of these different backgrounds, but they found most valuable is actually applying the method and then learning from each other's challenges and how it worked when actually scoring or when actually faced with the challenges of having to justify their score, for example. So yeah, in short, we are always looking for pilot companies that we can do projects with and we can further take the method.
Great, great. I don't see any hands here, so maybe Beatriz, as you offered us this opportunity to be in touch, would you like to mention, or Tiago is raising his hand, if Beatriz is not able to. She's sitting in Germany, actually. Tiago, go ahead, ask your question.
Sonia, hi everyone. Sonia, first, Maíra Caetano has made a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I'll look at it. Okay, so Shanique, what was the approach taken to avoid double counting when linking the SDGs to the impact categories?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question in that, of course, the SDGs are not mutually exclusive. So a lot of them mention the same types of content. So a lot of them mention the terms inclusive or fair or equal, or and that brings in a whole new definition to the actual SDG. So what we try to do is really focus on exactly what the target was describing. And then under each target is also a number of indicators. So we try really to stick to the intended target that was defined by the SDG itself. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question on double counting, but yeah, at least for the way SDGs are described, we really try to think about exactly the definition of the target.
Maíra, feel free to I mean, to speak up if you're not satisfied with the answer.
No, I was perfectly replied. Thank you, Janine.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Tiago, do you have a question, or were you just telling me to look at the chat?
No, actually, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Shanique. Thiago from IBICT, Brazil Institute for Science and Technology Information. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for the presentation. Very, very interesting work you're doing. I have a question. The benchmark process, I'm not really sure if I understood it correctly, but I think that the benchmark is a very crucial point because it gives a kind of a baseline, correct? So
Yes, exactly.
yeah, what is the approach suggested? I mean, you have to do kind of average LCA of the project. How do you do this benchmark? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's a really good question. And it's a question we've been getting quite frequently is, of course, depending on what benchmark is chosen, the results can differ hugely, and you can make your product seem much more positive than it actually is, for example. But the general approach for this, for choosing a benchmark, is really defined in the goal and scope phase. So, for example, if your goal and scope is to improve on a previous version of your product, then you will choose the benchmark as that previous version. But if your goal is to have better performance than the average piece of leather, for example, then you will choose an environmental benchmark that's product environmental footprint category rule, so PEFCR, for example. So it also depends a bit on what you've defined as the goal of the study. Do you want to improve your product based on some other product you have? Do you want to look at your performance relative to the industry? So that needs to be defined very clearly. And then we always say that it needs to be reported very clearly why you chose this benchmark and what has really been the justification for choosing it. So it needs to be very transparently reported. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. For us, for instance, it would be a different challenge. Not really different, but more, I guess, a bigger challenge here in Brazil. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely agree.
Okay. So if nobody else has questions, we will go on asking. So take this opportunity to really, I don't know, share your concerns, even with like double counting here earlier. Shanique, what's on your wish list in the short term?
Yes, in the short term, I think we are currently working on the publication, so all hands on deck there. But internally at PRé, we're really thinking more about scaling up something like this. So I know usually in an academic circle, a lot of research is done and a lot of time is then spent on developing methodologies to be perfect and to be able to be applied perfectly. And our approach a little bit at PRé is to trial and error everything, to try it out, reiterate, make it stronger, make it better, but take it to market as soon as possible. So have it really practical as soon as possible, and then improve it every year or two, because we really think there's a huge need here for something like this, and that we shouldn't wait until data or perfect data is available, or we have the best evidence-based justification for each single link, of which we have hundreds now. So we're really in belief that we want it to be used, and that's the way that we can learn from it. So the wish list is to have it published and then have another round of trial trial and error with companies, hopefully more trying than error. But yeah, I would say that's yeah, high up on the wish list at the moment.
Great, thank you. Diogo has a question, and I have one afterwards if nobody has one. Please, Diogo, speak up.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for the presentation. Very nice presentation. I just would like to share some experience on this approach because we had here in Brazil an application with my team. We studied the production of chicken meat in Brazil, and we just have an accepted paper on integrating this approach. We investigated the water footprint of chicken meat here in Brazil, and we investigated the Sustainable Development Goals numbers 2, 3, 6, 12, and 14. And it was very nice, this application. It was very similar to your presentation here. The main points that I would suggest we need to improve a little bit more is related to the benchmark choice, as Thiago was telling us, because I see this process of selecting a good benchmark is a little bit subjective, because it depends on the LCA practitioner. I think it would be nice if you could suggest like a process of stakeholders, of life cycle stakeholders interested on the study, and this group of stakeholders select the benchmark. So this is something that I in my opinion, is missing on this methodology. I remember last year or 2020, I sent this suggestion to the group from Professor Vaidema, because I remember you did an open call for people around the world, give some suggestions. I remember I gave the suggestion. I don't know if you saw this and discussed it internally, but I would again recommend this because I think this is something that is missing. And another suggestion is related to the screening approach when we use the LCA results to combine with the life cycle indicators, because this process is also dependent on the people that are performing this study, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult to select what kind of indicators are directly related to this LCA results that we have. In our case study focus on water footprint, this was not so easy. I remember we expended some days trying to filter and choose the right indicators to make this relationship. So this is my two suggestions: the selection of the benchmark and this final process of classification of the SDGs indicators if the LCA results that you have. But of course, this approach is very nice, very useful, and congratulations for this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the critique as well, because it's something that we've also gotten widely, is that this benchmark issue is always a bit of an issue, that selecting it is very subjective. And in developing the method, we've come to that issue many times and been able to see actually with a company that uses an internal benchmark, how it could skew results and it could look very different. And of course, in coming up with the method, we've also advised that ideally we would like you to use a PFCR, but that's not developed for every single product category or for every single industry. And that would be the most standardized approach to use. But unfortunately, it's not fully applicable to every single kind of product. So there, yes, there's definitely potential to improve. So this idea of, perhaps doing kind of a stakeholder consultation on your product and deciding where the benchmark should be is definitely a good idea. And thanks for the suggestion.
Great, thank you, Diogo. I see that Bia would like to say some words. Bia, the floor is yours. And again, thank you so much for connecting us.
Yes, thank you. Hi again, Shanique, and I'm really happy that this meeting was successful, that we could find an agenda and put everyone together. Thanks for the presentation. My question would just be, in a very practical way, do you think it makes sense to apply the methodology for already existing LCAs? Or would it be better if we would, at the beginning of a new study, already make this objective as maybe a complement to the LCA itself, that we would also assess the connection with the SDGs? Because I think it's, when we define this as part of the objective, I don't know how much this could or not impact the definition of premises, or even choosing different methodologies so everything could work out. So if you could just give a light on that, I appreciate.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for your question. Yes, so I think it would be preferable to already set this objective before the LCA study, so that you know already which methodologies and specifically impact category results are needed. So this methodology has been developed around EF 3.0 impact categories and the social metrics handbook impact categories. So if other impact assessment methods are used, then they cannot be applied. So of course, that's one thing. But then knowing the objective from the start also helps to define which SDGs perhaps are important, or the system boundaries initially that the product or the product system that will be defined beforehand. But of course, having LCA results themselves is the actual input to this methodology. So you could think of this method a little bit like a normalization step or a weighting step, where you could just have an SDG screening step, which takes your results and converts them into this new insight. So it is really critical to have, obviously, those results first, but definitely preferable to already set the objective from the beginning.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you. So now I think we have questions in the chat from Edivan.
Okay. Edivan, where is Edivan? Is PRé still working on the SDG assessment approach and on the combining of the impact pathway for all the 17 SDGs?
Yes. So we are not still working on the actual assessment approach, and so the formal name is the SDG screening approach. There's also another parallel method called the SDG assessment approach, which was being developed by Bo Weidema at 2.0 LCA Consultants. So our energies are no longer going into actually developing the approach, but more in applying the approach. And then at some point we will come to a stage in which we have so many insights about how the method has been applied, and we can improve the method and maintain it and make it more applicable for the time. So at the moment, we're not in methodology development phase, but rather in applications phase.
Okay, great. And also Sueli was commenting in the chat that this whole methodology will probably help push social LCA further. And yesterday you had this social value community gathering, which was a huge success, I understand. So looking forward to welcoming you to teaching us a bit about social LCA as well in the near future. We're still debating that.
Yes, definitely. A really good point made here is, of course, a prerequisite is that you need social LCA results to feed into this method. So it is also a good way to stimulate companies to start thinking about a more holistic assessment. And we're hoping also that it then stimulates the field of social LCA in general, if more companies are interested in an assessment like this.
I was sad to learn that the SDG 17 was less like targeted by your in this work, because we always sell that conducting an LCA brings people together, areas together, value chain actors together, which then afterwards hopefully won't work alone anymore because they understood the value of being connected. Don't you see that too? I mean, not in the LCA itself, but in the process of gathering information, of telling everybody the results and what has to be strengthened and what has to be protected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, is that actually LCAs are not just a siloed department in a company, but actually require data collection across various parts of companies, so logistics and procurement and various other departments. A really good point. Actually, I've not thought about that before, but definitely conducting an LCA study itself, it should maybe be an impact category that's added somehow, that we could link that as well to that SDG. But with relation to this goal of partnerships for the goals, it's quite a difficult one in the way that it's defined. Of course, it means that various organizations should form partnerships amongst themselves, and that communication channels should be strengthened, and all of these types of things. And this is a little bit outside of the field of traditional LCA impact categories, of course. So yeah, a really good point, and I would definitely agree, Sonia.
Okay, great. Who else has questions? Please. There are a lot of all the 45 participants are still with us, so please ask your questions. Well, Shanique, thank you for letting us know here how to contact you afterwards. I believe you will have an avalanche of emails afterwards.
Great. Yes, looking forward to it. I'm also curious, Sonia, what the development of SDGs on your side has been like, and at what stage you're at and what you're doing with relation to them.
Well, I guess this was the part where Karina told us in the beginning, which you sadly missed. But we did the SDG Compass capacity building with Global Compact 2 years ago, and understood how, as an association, we could contribute the most. And what we felt is that SDG 17 being so little, having advanced so little in the last 6 or 7 years, how can we, as an association, promote also with sharing our expertise with other countries, South, or so we also are looking at environments where we can share our expertise here, or our journey, or what went wrong, what went well in this context with other companies and other countries also. So when you say that you're from South Africa, that means that we may probably have a good connection here to share with South Africa, if you think it's interesting what we went through here in the last years. So, but maybe Karina, as the mother of the working group, can say a few words too.
Yes, that's great. Sonia has told everything that's important, because what you want to do with Rede LCA is to understand the value proposition, why Rede LCA even exists. So we think the SDG 17 make a lot of sense of that.
Exactly, definitely. And this was a huge struggle for us to think about as well, because of course the SDGs are focused on the systems level understanding of how things are managed or governed, or it's very top level. And here we are in the LCA world, where we're really focused on products, exact product life cycles in specific. So to relate the two is a challenge in itself, because I think the SDGs have most of their focus in these management systems, and by improving those systems of communication, for example, that we already mentioned, and of knowledge sharing, and of networking, for example, these are already contributing to the SDGs. But unfortunately, they sit outside of this life cycle framework that we directly apply to a product, a very tangible thing. So yeah, I really also admire what you all do as part of the LCI. So yeah, keep doing it.
In the now by the end of November, we will have a meeting of all the ACA associations which participated in last LCM last year, so from Sweden and so on. So we will have this meeting to understand how maybe to create a network of associations, because everybody has a very, very nice story to tell, what went wrong, what went well, and how we can help companies and governments to advance in using life cycle thinking in their decision-making processes.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and of course, what is invaluable in that kind of context is the voices of those less developing countries. I mean, I look at South Africa. I now live in the Netherlands, so there's a huge difference from where I was born and raised to where I am now. But of course, there are different challenges that LCA can address in a country like South Africa versus a country like the Netherlands. And it's really invaluable to bring those voices together, to share those kinds of experiences. So yeah, a really good idea.
Yeah, a few years back, we had here in Brazil the World Water Congress. And we learned from South Africa that water and sanitation challenges and the culture and everything and problems and so on were very similar. So why always look at Europe or the US or Asia for examples or for how-to practices if we may be more similar to the South, so other countries, and learn from each other there. So feel free to connect us with people from South Africa if you feel like it.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, we'll keep that in mind. Yeah.
I see that Beatrice had to leave us already. We do have some 34 colleagues still with us. Please ask your questions, or we stop earlier, maybe 10 minutes earlier. I don't know. Maybe. Well, a huge thank you, Shanique, for the privilege of having you here with us today. And I believe we will have lots of things to discuss and to work on together from now on.
Yes, I definitely hope so. Yeah, it's a really privilege for me too. Really interesting always to know what's going on in different parts of the world and in the LCA community, which I think is a small family that I think we all kind of think a bit the same and have the same approach to addressing some really important global problems. So it's always a privilege to meet like-minded people. So thank you as well.
What I always do after these meetings is to look at the participants list. So we will also share with all of you who was here with us today, so that you really get in touch with each other without needing Rede LCA for that. So We're really good. Thank you, Karina, of course, and everybody else who was here with us for this hour and a half on Friday, pre-election. So busy times here in Brazil.
I can imagine.
Okay, so let's maybe finish earlier, 9 minutes or something. Karina, would you still want to say something?
No, just thank you very much, Shanique, for your time and to be here with us. I am really sure that we probably talk more later.
Yes. Yes, I hope so. I hope it was not too much information at once. And yeah, I hope that there are some follow-ups or at least inspirations from the session.
It surely was a lot of information and lots of connecting
a lot of sides.
That's why we will certainly look into the charts once you share them with us.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Me too.
So great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so
much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Great weekend.
Obrigada pela participação. Bom final de semana.
Bom dia.
Bye.